Welcome to Second Listen Saturday on the Parenting Roundabout podcast, where we share some fun moments from a past episode for your weekend listening pleasure. Look for new episodes every Monday through Friday.
It has truly been a rough couple days in Terri's hometown of Thousand Oaks, California, and surrounding area. So tell us.
Well, we're recording this on Friday, the Friday before you're listening to this on Monday. So yesterday, Thursday, was the day that the news reports came in about a shooting in a country bar in Thousand Oaks, California, which is a spot on the map to most people, but is the place that I grew up and lived on and off until 1988. And that was horrific enough, reading the reports coming in on that. And then somewhere in the late afternoon to evening, I started reading about brush fires. And as we're talking right now, there are brush fires closing in on poor little Thousand Oaks from like two directions. And I belong to I grew up in Thousand Oaks Facebook page. And there's just so many reports of neighborhoods going up in flames. Is it at this street yet? Yes, it is. This hill went up. And while it is not yet in the part of town where my childhood home was, I recognize a lot of the streets. I recognize a lot of the neighborhoods, and it's just apocalyptic, you know?
Yeah.
Come on. Already it was the worst day imaginable for Thousand Oaks, and now people are losing their homes right and left. Large amounts of the town are evacuated. I'm seeing like my high school on the list of places that people can evacuate to. It's just surreal. So it got me thinking about, our roots. We've talked before about where we grew up as kids versus where our kids grew up, and do we think it's a better experience or a worst? But there's also something about, where do you feel that your roots are? Do you still feel connected to the place you grew up? Would you say now you're more connected to the place you're living now? Do you think your kids are going to feel a connection to where they grew up, or do you think they're just going to go off and do their thing and never look back? I'm at a point in my life now where I've lived more of my life where I am now than I did where I grew up. And so I don't really think of my old hometown all that much. I haven't been back since my mom passed away. So I really have I have no family there or any reason to go back. I think of it fondly, but I don't think of it much unless something like this comes up. And then, the Facebook group also. I don't know if you guys belong to these for your old neighborhoods, but I go on there and, most of the time they're old pictures. Hey, do you remember this parade? Is anybody in this class picture, whatever. Mm-hmm. And that's kind of fun. But most of the time don't even see people I know, names I recognize occasionally. So it's a very loose connection. And when something terrible like this happens, it brings back that there's still a part of me for whom that is a meaningful place. And I hate to see terrible things happen to it. But I don't feel like it's, other than that, I don't feel a connection to it. And yet the place where I'm living now, where I've lived more than half my life, I guess now, it's a place I moved to. It's not a place I feel really connected to. I lived in a whole bunch of different places in my 20s. And so, I don't know. I'm kind of trying to come to terms with where I feel is my home. I think I've always felt that like people are more your home than places.
Yeah.
But do you guys still have any connection to the place you grew up? Do you still think of it as a place? Was there one place? I think, Catherine, you may have moved around a lot when you were a kid, right?
No, I didn't really.
Okay.
I lived in the same small college town for my whole life.
Okay.
What I did do was leave for college, which not a lot of people did. A lot of people stayed and then they left, but a lot of people stayed for college. And I really didn't want to because I just didn't want to do 4 more years of high school in college. So I left. But, given that it was a college town, it was where Penn State is, I still have that connection to it, sports and whatever. And several years ago when there was such a terrible scandal coming out of the Penn State football department or whatever you want to call it, that was sort of like where you are, Terry, right now, which, you couldn't really think about anything else. It was just, and that was obviously national news. And so is this incident.
Right.
And, but it was so personal to so many people that I knew. And one of the sort of key figures in that scandal, somebody who finally reported something, had actually gone to my high school.
Oh, wow.
So it was a big deal, and it was difficult.
Yeah, it's weird seeing your, like, this place that you remember warmly in memory just be pulled out into, like, black and white and harsh light of news, and it's like, no, this is a snow globe over here. Right. See, this is where I grew up. It's not. It's put it back.
Right, exactly.
It's not supposed to be that way.
Yeah.
Every now and then I see a movie star who grew up in Thousand Oaks. That's where I see my town's name in the headlines. And not this way.
In my case, and maybe this is what you were thinking of before, Terry, my parents moved right when I graduated from high school.
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
And I do still have family there, but but not my parents. So I didn't go back nearly as much as I would have if my parents were living there. And, my kids, I think they feel pretty connected to where they live, to where we live now, because they've been there their whole lives. My daughter was 2 when we got there, so obviously she doesn't really remember life before that, but she is very proud that she was born in New York City, and that is what it says on her birth certificate. She thinks that is very cool. So
that is cool. Well, Nicole, cool. You've made probably the biggest change from where you grew up to where you are now of any of us.
Oh my gosh.
I mean, I'm on an opposite coast, but I'm still in the same country.
It's a 180. I grew up in this tiny, I think maybe 3,000 people, I want to say. Tiny community. It was isolated. It was the nearest city, so the nearest McDonald's was 5 hours away.
Wow.
Still is. It's 5 hours away. So it was, yes, and that was where the nearest airport was. So it was very isolated, and sorry, I keep saying was, past tense. It is up. So if you know where Lake Superior is, it is about 40 minutes north of Lake Superior. So it's north. and cold. Like winter was 10 months of the year. It was cold up there. So I feel like I'm in a totally different, now I'm living in a suburb of LA basically, and it's hot all the time, and it just couldn't be any different. Like, it's just really bizarre. But I'm like Terry, I'm on a Facebook page for my hometown, and it's kind of sad. Like, I feel a connection to it in the sense that it's where I spent most of my formative years growing up. Like, that was, I think we moved there when I was 4, and then I left when I was 17, and so I did all my my elementary and then most of my high school years there, and so I have like a connection to it in that sense, that like I feel like I remember every turn and every trail and every nook and cranny in the community, and because it was small and we had free reign of that community as long as we were in the door by the 9 o'clock siren. We had free reign, and we'd be all over town on any given day, and from one end to the other and back again. It was just one of those communities that you were all over the place with no cell phones. And so my kids do not relate at all. Like, they hear me talk about it and they see pictures, but they just cannot relate what it would be like to live in that community. And so they just have no idea what that's about. And I left when I was 17, I left. When I just turned 17, I left. And while I was away, because I went and did a year abroad for school, and while I was away, my parents moved to the other side of the country. So I've never been back. So it's kind of like this, part of my life that's never had any closure. Because I always thought when I was away for that year, I was going to be coming back home and picking up where I left off, but I didn't. When I came back, my parents were in a whole other community and on the other side of the country. So that was kind of bizarre. And then my kids, I don't know, I think they probably feel like, where we are now is their hometown. Definitely my daughter, because she's been here since she was in grade 1. But my son, he's a little torn.
But do they have a little, like, sort of pride or, this is something special about me? I'm from Canada?
Oh, yeah. No doubt. Mm-hmm. Oh, definitely. Yeah. No, they're still tied to, in many ways, to the community that we moved from when the last community that we were in, because that's where my son spent his younger years. My daughter was born there, and we still have friends and family there. We go back there all the time and visit. So they do have that connection to that hometown. So, it's the nature of moving around. You have all these different places that
that's true,
have different meanings.
Yeah, unlike you guys, my parents stayed in the same town after. I went away to college, and then I came back, and then I went to work in Kansas City, and then I came back and I lived at home for a while, and then I lived in the same town. I went out, but and then even after I moved to New Jersey, my parents were still in Thousand Oaks. I would come and visit every year or every other year. I was constantly coming back, so it was like home base. Even after I had long ceased to live there, it was still, a place. And then, once I no longer had anybody living there, it's really fallen away. But I still had a connection to that place well after I stopped living there, which is, I think, maybe makes the roots a little deeper, I guess. And my kids, they're in their 20s now and still living at home. So this has been where they've always lived, this same town in New Jersey. We've moved house once, but we stayed in the same town, and their grandparents lived in this town, and for a long time their aunt and uncle lived in this town. So it's like every now and then we look at our property tax bill and we think we should really move to someplace else. And it's like there's a wave of panic that goes over the kids. What? We're going to do what? And so, well, we're going to take you with us. But I think it's still, this is where they know everything. This is where they went all through school. This is where they've always, the only place really, they don't remember being in Russia and being in the orphanage. This is the only town they've ever known. So it will be hard. It will be weird. Even though I can see, from my point of view, that there are more and more things about the town I don't like. And even though I've lived half my life here, I have no particular attachment to it. But I'm sure they do. And it would be very weird for them to just up and be from someplace else. Right. And the one thing that stops my husband and I every time we think about moving is that they do have a lot of connections here. Yeah. And especially for them, disabilities, you need those connections. You want there always to be a big, heavy safety net of people who know them. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so that was never a concern for me as a kid. It's like, get this net off of me. I'm going to go someplace else. I'm swimming over there in the deep end.
Yeah, I mean, this is the longest that, like the house that we're in now, we've been in for 10 years, and it's the longest that I've ever lived in any one house.
Oh, wow.
So because even in my hometown, we had moved around a couple times.
Yeah.
So this is really this is setting down roots for me.
Yeah.
This is a whole new experience.
And it's so culturally different.
Oh my God. Once again, another 180 from where I grew up. It's a very, very different, culturally a very different world too. So
a lot of people, when we moved to Wisconsin from New York City, basically, and a lot of people were like, oh my gosh, how can you do that? Like, culture shock, it's going to be huge. And we both said, we're moving to the same kind of place where we grew up. Right. It was the city time that was an aberration. It's not this place, it's a lot like the places where we grew up. I mean,
Right.
It's like a smallish town. It's very suburban, even though it's not a suburb of anything. But it has that kind of feeling to it. And, where I grew up, it was a college town, which is another whole different animal. But,
right.
Yeah.
And then my husband grew up in a small town, but that was, packed in with a whole bunch of other small towns and a little more urban, but still very tiny in terms of like parochialism. I don't know. So, but where we are is definitely, it feels a lot like where we grew up. So we didn't have a crazy culture shock when we got there. As people were afraid we would.
Yeah. That does seem different.
Well, especially after being in New York.
Yeah. But, we had a 2-year-old. It wasn't like we were going out to dinner and shows and bars and, we weren't doing anything like that at the time that we left. And our friends were kind of scattered all over too, because that's what happens. Your
Sure.
friends are in 100-mile radius of suburbs and
Right.
So yeah.
Yep.
But I think my kids definitely identify with being from where we are. So
Yeah.
from where they've grown up.
So I told them in 30 years they have to come back and do a podcast and see if we were right that they feel a connection.
Exactly.
What was that place I used to live? Oh yeah, I can't remember.
Yeah. What form of like nostalgic Facebook group will they have? Like, because it definitely won't be Facebook.
That is kind of a cool thing to be able to connect with places on Facebook.
Yeah.
And on social media.
Yeah. I wonder. I should see if there is one for my town. I'm in the one for my high school class.
Which wasn't big enough.
A big class. Mine was big. So there's plenty of people.
Yeah. And occasionally I see somebody on there that I recognize their name, or they recognize me and they friend me on Facebook, but it's like we haven't seen each other in 50 years or 40 years.
Right. Yeah.
What are we going to talk about? But I guess it's sort of nice to connect anyway.
My Facebook group it's actually kind of sad because the town that I grew up in, it was a mining town. So the economy relied on the operation of the local mine. And once the mine shut down, 3/4 of the town shut down. So people moved, like there was a mass exodus. People moved and left, and that's why my parents left. And a lot of businesses closed, schools closed, the whole town shut down basically. So it's a little bit of it's a little bare bones these days. So we see these pictures pop up on Facebook. It's kind of sad. It's like, oh my gosh, I can't believe it. That's what it is now. And, it hasn't gone in the opposite direction like most communities do, where they grow over time and evolve.
Yeah.
We're actually regressing a lot. So it's quite sad to see. But lots of familiar faces and names, that's for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. From what I can tell from reading on the group, Thousand Oaks is still a very similar sort of suburban outpost to what it was when I grew up. I'm sure there are big changes, but it still seems to be not terribly much different. I'm sure it's expanded a little bit, and I just can't remember the last time I was there. It was a couple of months after my mom passed away, and we were helping my stepfather pack up the house. And I remember one of my mom's friends said to me, "I'm probably never going to see you again, am I?" And I said, "Yeah, probably not." I haven't been back. So it was sad, but at the same time, there's no reason. It's like it's a long flight from New Jersey.